hear from him. Words that shattered every boundary I thought I had. And I said yes. But not for the reasons you think. It wasn't lust. It wasn't revenge. It was something darker. Lonelier. Something buried in the cracks of years spent feeling unloved. And I've carried that moment ever since. Like a secret tattoo etched into my chest, only visible when the lights are low and the guilt is loud. Because some decisions, they don't just hurt the people around you. They haunt you. They reshape you. This is my story. And I'm not proud of it. But if you've ever felt unseen, if you've ever reached for something just to feel real again, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand. So take a breath and come with me into the mess. Because on Heartfelt Tales Unfold, we tell the stories we've been too afraid to say out loud. Subscribe now. You won't want to miss what comes next. It's strange, isn't it? How a house can feel full, but still feel empty. We'd been married 8 years. 8 years of routines. Shared calendars. School pickups. Grocery lists on the fridge. 2 beautiful children, my whole world. And yet, somehow, in the middle of it all, I felt completely and utterly alone. My husband, Mark, he wasn't a bad man. He provided. He worked hard. He took care of us in the way society praises. But somewhere along the way, he stopped seeing me. Stopped asking how I was. Stopped touching me the way he used to. Stopped listening to my silence the way he used to listen to my words. At first, I thought it was a phase. That work stress would pass, that the distance was temporary. But days turned to months. And months to years. He was always gone, physically or mentally. Late nights, business trips, always another meeting, another project. Even when he was home, his body would be here, but his mind, it was always somewhere else. We'd sit at dinner in silence. The kids would chatter. I'd try to fill the gaps. But Mark would nod half-heartedly, eyes glued to his phone, like I was background noise. Sometimes, I'd lie awake next to him and just stare at the ceiling. Wondering when I became a stranger in my own marriage. Wondering if he even noticed the ache in my chest every time he rolled away from me in his sleep. It wasn't always like that. There was love once. Passion. Laughter. But life has a cruel way of eroding the things you thought were solid. And in that quiet crumble, someone else stepped in. Chris. Mark's best friend since college. The fun one. The storyteller. The one who always knew how to read a room and lighten it. He used to come around every couple of weeks. Then, every week. Then, well, he was at our house more than Mark was. At first, I didn't think much of it. Chris had just gone through a divorce. He was lonely. And I understood loneliness better than anyone. We'd sit in the kitchen while the kids played upstairs. Share a glass of wine. Laugh about memories from their college days. The stories Mark used to tell me before he forgot how to make me laugh. Chris noticed things Mark hadn't in years. Like when I got my hair done. Or when I switched up the living room decor. He'd say things like, "You always know how to make a space feel warm." And it caught me off guard, how much I needed to hear that. He wasn't flirting. Not yet. It was more presence. Attention. He saw me. We talked about everything. Parenting. Life. Regret. Dreams we were afraid to say out loud. One night, after the kids went to bed, I told him how sometimes I felt like I was disappearing. And he looked at me, with this softness in his eyes, and said, if he can't see what he has, that's on him. Not you. I laughed it off. Told him he was being dramatic. But something in me shifted that night. The next time I heard his car pull into the driveway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Anticipation. I used to smile when I heard his car pull up. That should have been my first warning. But it's easy to ignore the signs when someone finally makes you feel wanted. And in a life where I was constantly giving, pouring into my kids, my marriage, a home that never gave back, Chris became a space where I could just exist. No pretending. No performing. Just me. Looking back, I wonder, Was it always headed here? Was I naive to think lines wouldn't blur? That attention wouldn't morph into affection? But when you go long enough without being chosen, even crumbs can feel like a feast. And Chris, he didn't offer crumbs. He offered conversation, connection, laughter, things I didn't even know I'd been starving for. And little by little, I let my guard down, not with a bang, but with slow, quiet steps. Steps that would eventually lead me to that Thursday night. To the moment everything changed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. First, there was the text. And then, the request. And the version of me that answered. She wasn't the same woman who stood at the altar 8 years ago. She was tired. She was broken. She was human. It started on one of those evenings that felt like it could have been any other. The kind of evening where you go through the motions, say the right things, smile at the right moments, but you're not really there. Mark had just gotten back from a 3-day work trip. He barely took his shoes off before saying he had to hop on another call. Something urgent. It always was. I remember setting the table, placing his plate down with that familiar, sinking feeling in my chest. The kids were already in their pajamas, full from dinner and scattered across the living room floor, half watching a cartoon and half dozing off. Chris showed up around 7. He knocked like always, 3 quick taps, no doorbell. Brought a bottle of wine with him, as usual. And that easy smile that made everything feel just a little lighter, a little less heavy. Mark barely acknowledged him. Said a quick, "Hey, man," and then retreated upstairs with his laptop in one hand and his phone already pressed to his ear. Dinner was fine. The kids were loud. I was tired. Chris, though, he carried the conversation like he always did. Joked with the kids. Made them laugh. He made me laugh. It wasn't forced. It wasn't awkward. It felt normal, which was rare in my world. By the time the kids had fallen asleep on the couch, the kitchen was a mess. Plates stacked, crumbs everywhere, wine glasses half full. I stood by the sink, sleeves rolled up, water running. And then Chris appeared behind me with a towel in his hand and that casual shrug. "I'll dry," he said. I almost said no. Almost told him I was fine. But instead, I just nodded. I didn't want to be alone in the quiet. Not tonight. We stood there in the kitchen, side by side, passing dishes back and forth, talking, not about anything groundbreaking, just life. We laughed about college stories I'd already heard before. How Mark used to sneak into the girls' dorms just to bring me coffee. How Chris used to cover for him. He was always late 'cause of you, he teased. And I don't know if it was the wine, or the late hour, or just the way his voice dropped when he said it, but something shifted in the air. The conversation turned slower, softer, more personal. He started talking about his divorce, how it caught him off guard, how he thought he'd done everything right, how sometimes sleeping alone didn't bother him, but waking up alone. That was the part he still wasn't used to. I listened, nodding. And then I said something I didn't plan to. Something like, "It's strange how you can be married and still feel alone." Our eyes met. And it was only a second, but it was enough. There was something unspoken in the space between us. Something I didn't want to admit I noticed. I turned back to the sink, focused on the last dish like it was a lifeline. That's when he said it. Quietly. Not like he was trying to seduce me. More like he was telling the truth that had been sitting on his tongue for too long. "You deserve to be seen, you know." I didn't respond right away. Because what do you even say to that? "Thank you? Please don't." Say it again? Instead, I laughed. Lightly. Dismissively. Like it didn't hit me like a punch to the chest. Like I didn't immediately feel a tear threaten to betray me in the corner of my eye. I dried my hands, picked up the wine bottle, and said something like, "You're getting soft on me, Chris." He smirked, but there was sadness in his eyes. Maybe even something else. He helped me move the kids to bed, tucked the blanket around my daughter with this gentleness I didn't expect, then turned toward the door, looked at me one more time, and said, "Good night. Don't overthink it." But I did. God. I did. I lay in bed that night, eyes wide open in the dark, his words echoing in my head like a song I didn't know I had memorized. You deserve to be seen. I thought about how long it had been since someone looked at me like I mattered. How long it had been since someone meant their words when they said them. And as much as I tried to shake it off, as much as I tried to file that moment away into the harmless folder of my mind, I couldn't. Because that night, something shifted. A door creaked open somewhere deep inside me, and I didn't know it yet, but that door would be impossible to close. I wish I could tell you I brushed it off, that I went to sleep that night, woke up the next morning, packed the kids' lunches, kissed my husband goodbye, and never thought about Chris again. But that would be a lie. The truth is, his words burrowed under my skin. You deserve to be seen. It was like they had been custom carved for a part of me I didn't even know was aching. Because I didn't feel seen. I hadn't in a long time. Mark and we'd stopped being us. Now we were just parents, housemates, silent partners in a marriage that looked good on paper, but felt hollow when the lights went out. And every time I tried to tell myself it wasn't a big deal, what Chris said, that little voice in the back of my mind would whisper, "Then why can't you stop thinking about it?" I hated that voice. Because I knew what it meant. It meant something inside me had stirred. And I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. But I also wasn't sure I could live with what it meant if it didn't. There were nights I'd lie in bed beside Mark, listening to the sound of his snoring, staring at the ceiling, blinking back tears so they wouldn't spill onto the pillow. I'd feel the mattress dip beneath his weight, feel the heat of his body inches from mine, and yet I'd never felt colder. Sometimes I'd get up quietly, walk into the bathroom, close the door gently so it didn't creak, and I'd sit there, on the cold tile floor, just sit. Sometimes I cried. Sometimes I just stared. Most times, I asked myself the same haunting question over and over again. Is this it? Is this what marriage becomes? Is this what love withers into? Responsibilities, to-do lists, empty glances, half-finished conversations, and a ring that feels heavier with every year that passes? I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't searching for someone new. I just wanted to feel real again. To feel like I mattered. Like someone saw me. Not the mom, not the wife. Me. And then, there was the text. It came 2 days after that dinner. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, when my phone buzzed. "Chris, you okay?" 2 words. But they landed with so much weight, I had to sit down. I stared at them for a full minute. I could have ignored it. Should have, maybe. But I didn't. I replied, "Yeah, just tired." Simple. Safe. And yet somehow, it wasn't. Because he answered right away, "Chris." Can't stop thinking about what I said. Hope it didn't mess things up. I could feel my pulse in my ears. My hands trembling just slightly. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. What do you say to that? Do you pretend you forgot? Do you call it out? Do you admit that you've been playing that moment on repeat every night since? Instead, I typed, "We're good." It just caught me off guard. And he sent back a message that made my breath catch. "Chris, I meant it." I didn't respond to that one. Not right away. I told myself it was best to let it hang there, unanswered, unacknowledged. But the truth? I saved that message. Opened it more than once. Reread it when I was feeling especially invisible. It didn't feel like flirting. It felt like recognition. Like someone had finally turned on the light in a room I'd been sitting alone in for far too long. And that made me feel something I didn't know how to name. Guilt, yes. But also, comfort. Warmth. Relief. And that scared me more than anything else. Because if your husband's best friend makes you feel safer than your husband does, what does that say about your marriage? About you? I wanted to tell someone. I did. But who do you call to confess that your heart is drifting somewhere it shouldn't be? Who do you tell that you're terrified of your own thoughts? So I carried it, like a stone in my chest. A weight I couldn't set down because part of me didn't want to. It was wrong. God, I knew it was wrong. But it was also the first time in years that something felt alive. And no matter how much I told myself, it was just a moment. Just a message. Just a flicker of something harmless. Deep down, I knew. This wasn't going away. It was growing. Quietly. Carefully. In the background of my life. And I was letting it. Because feeling seen, even for just a second, was beginning to feel more necessary than being good. After that night, things didn't go back to normal. They got closer, more frequent, more dangerous. Chris started coming by a lot more. At first, it was for the kids, bringing over snacks, playing board games with them in the living room, staying for dinner when Mark was late or out of town. Which, honestly, was often. At first, it felt innocent, comfortable, familiar. But slowly, it started feeling like something else entirely. Because with every visit, the energy shifted. There was a pause when our eyes met. A hesitation in the way I'd hand him his wine glass, careful not to brush fingers, because when I did, I felt it. That jolt. That current that wasn't supposed to be there. And I think he felt it too. Sometimes he'd look at me like he wanted to say something but didn't. Other times, he did say things. Things I wasn't ready to hear, but also couldn't stop craving. Like the night he came by after Mark had canceled date night again. He found me in the kitchen, standing at the counter with a half-cooked meal and tears I'd wiped away too fast. He leaned against the fridge, arms crossed, watching me. Then he said softly, "You know, if I ever had a shot at something real, it'd be with someone like you." My breath caught. I didn't respond. Not with words. I just stood there, frozen, holding a wooden spoon like it was the only thing tethering me to reality. And then he smiled. Sad, almost. Like he already knew what I wouldn't say. From that night on, the texts changed. Still short. Still subtle. But underneath them was something else, something buzzing, alive, unsaid. "Chris, did you eat today?" "Me, barely." "Chris, you need to take care of you too. You matter, you know." I stopped showing Mark my phone when he walked into the room. I started deleting messages, started being careful about the volume of my laugh when Chris said something funny. It felt like I was building a secret room inside myself, one only Chris had the key to. He started calling me his person. It was a joke at first, after I remembered some obscure story from his college years that even Mark had forgotten. He smiled and said, "God, you really are my person." But it didn't feel like a joke. Not the way he said it, not the way I smiled back. And I knew, somewhere deep inside, that I wasn't just letting it happen. I was choosing it. Choosing the emotional affair over the emptiness of my marriage. Choosing warmth over silence. Choosing to feel something, even if it was wrong. One night, it was raining again, always raining, like the universe was trying to wash something clean. Chris stayed late. The kids had gone to bed early, exhausted from a birthday party. Mark was on another business trip. I poured us a glass of red. We sat on the couch, the TV playing low, more for background noise than anything else. We talked. About nothing. About everything. Then the conversation turned quiet. Comfortable. Painful. And then, without warning, he reached for my hand. His fingers wrapped around mine gently, like he was testing if I'd pull away. I didn't. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't breathe. And, in that moment, everything that had been unspoken between us was suddenly loud. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. I didn't look at him. Just stared at the floor, at our hands. At the space between right and wrong collapsing. After a few seconds, seconds that stretched into eternity, I slowly pulled my hand away. But not in rejection. In fear, because that one touch made it real. Too real. I stood up quickly, said something about needing to check on the kids. He nodded. Didn't follow me. When I came back, he was gone. He'd left a note. Didn't want to make things weird. "I'll see you soon." I kept that note in my drawer for weeks. folded, hidden, like a confession I wasn't ready to read out loud. But things were weird. Everything was. Mark didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and just didn't care enough to ask. Or maybe he cared and was too afraid to find out the answer. That was almost worse. The days that followed, I became two versions of myself. The mother, the wife, the homemaker, and the woman who checked her phone every time it buzzed with a little skip in her chest. The woman who wore perfume even when she wasn't leaving the house. Who started putting on lipstick again. Who walked slower when Chris was around, just so the moment could stretch longer. And I hated her. But I also envied her. Because she was seen, wanted, chosen. And then came the message. The one that made my hands shake. The one that changed everything. It was late. The kids were asleep. Mark was in the next room, asleep with his laptop still open beside him. My phone lit up. Chris, I know I shouldn't say this. And I don't expect anything. But I need to get this out before it eats me alive. I want one night. Just one. With you. No expectations. No strings. Just honesty. Just us. And just like that, I was staring down the line I'd sworn I'd never cross. And the part of me that had been quiet for so long, it wasn't quiet anymore. I stared at that message for a long time. I want one night. Just one. No strings. I need to know if this, us, is real. My thumb hovered over the screen, like replying meant opening a door I couldn't close. Like responding would make it true. Make it irreversible. And for a moment, I felt everything at once. Shock. Disgust. Longing. Fear. Desire. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. I wanted to delete the message. I wanted to pretend I'd never read it. But more than anything, I wanted to answer it. Because I already knew. Deep down. I already knew what I was going to do. But first, I had to go through the ritual. The ritual of pretending. Pretending I didn't hear the sound of my own pulse racing. Pretending I wasn't replaying every moment Chris and I had ever shared like a movie on loop. Pretending I wasn't standing at the edge of a cliff, waiting to jump. I spent that night pacing. From the bedroom to the kitchen. From the kitchen to the bathroom. From the bathroom to the hallway, where I stood in the dark, just staring at the closed door of our children's room. I pressed my hand against it. Felt the tiny thud of their dreams breathing behind it. And I cried, silently, bitterly, because I knew, no matter what I chose, I was about to break something, and there was no putting it back together once it cracked. I crawled into bed next to Mark. He didn't stir. Didn't notice my shaking, didn't ask why I couldn't stop sighing. And that hurt. God, it hurt. Because part of me was still begging for a reason to stay loyal. A reason to remember who I was before all this began. A reason to believe that maybe, just maybe, he would turn to me. Touch my hand. Ask what was wrong. Say something, anything, to remind me he still cared. But he didn't. He rolled over. Snored softly. And just like that, I knew. The battle I'd been fighting in silence? I'd already lost it. Around 9:50 p.m., I got up. My heart in my throat. I stood in front of the mirror, unsure who I was anymore. Was I the broken wife? The selfish woman? The aching human? I picked up my phone. Typed. Deleted. Typed again. Then I sent it. Come over. After 10. I sat on the edge of the bed for 10 full minutes, staring at the message. No reply. But I didn't need one. I knew he would come. And at exactly 10:06 p.m., I heard it. The sound of tires pulling into the driveway. The low hum of an engine shutting off. The creak of the front gate. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then, the door unlocked. And everything inside me, every voice, every memory, every line I had drawn and redrawn in my head, went silent. There was no turning back now. I had opened the door, and on the other side of it was the version of me I swore I'd never become. But there she was, standing still, waiting, wanting, ready to let go of guilt, just for a moment, if it meant feeling wanted again. The air was thick, still, almost sacred. He didn't say a word when he stepped inside. He just looked at me, and in his eyes, I didn't see judgment. I didn't see thrill. I didn't even see lust. I saw recognition. Like he'd been walking toward me for years and had finally arrived. And without a word, the door closed behind him. The next morning, he was gone. No sound. No goodbye. Just the faint smell of his cologne on the blanket beside me. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling like it held answers. Like if I just looked hard enough, the shame would soften, the weight in my chest would shift. But it didn't. The world outside my window was already moving on, birds chirping, cars passing, a neighbor's dog barking like nothing had changed. But everything had. Everything had changed. I sat up slowly, like my body was heavier than it used to be. My legs swung over the edge of the bed, and I noticed the clock. 6:42 a.m. The exact time I usually got up to pack the kids' lunches, lay out their clothes, kiss their foreheads, and tuck notes into their bags like nothing in this house ever trembled. And I did it anyway. I went through the motions like I was underwater. Mechanical. Muted. I moved through my home like a stranger in my own skin. Then, my phone buzzed. I already knew who it was. I didn't want to look. But of course I did. Chris, don't worry. I won't say anything. 7 words. 7 tiny words that felt like a verdict. And for some reason, that made it worse. I stared at that message for so long, my eyes began to sting. Not from tears, but from the lack of them. Because that's what scared me most. I couldn't cry. I couldn't feel the heartbreak or the remorse the way I thought I would. The way I should. I stood up, walked to the mirror. And what I saw looking back at me wasn't me. My face looked the same. My eyes maybe a little darker. A little emptier. But it was more than that. There was something missing. The woman staring back at me. She didn't flinch. She didn't wince. She just stared. And I hated how familiar that numbness felt. Because it meant I was already used to betraying myself. That afternoon, Mark came home early. He didn't say why. Just walked through the front door like nothing had cracked open inside these walls 12 hours before. He dropped his bag by the stairs, kissed the top of our daughter's head, and came into the kitchen where I was cutting strawberries like I hadn't just committed a betrayal I couldn't undo. He looked at me. Not deeply, not curiously, but long enough to notice something was off. "You okay?" he asked. His voice was casual, but his eyes, there was a flicker. Of concern? Suspicion? Habit? I smiled, tight, practiced hollow. "Yeah," I said. "Just tired." And he nodded. That was it. No follow-up. No pressing. No clue. Or maybe he knew something. Maybe not everything, but something. Maybe there's a kind of silence people carry when they sense betrayal, even if they can't name it yet. We went about the rest of the day like nothing had happened. We made lunch. Watched a cartoon with the kids. He scrolled on his phone. I folded laundry. Normal. Routine. Rehearsed. But inside me, everything was different. The air felt heavier. My skin felt tighter. Every sound in the house was louder. The ticking of the clock, the creak of the stairs, the thud of my own heartbeat. And every time I looked at Mark, I saw a man I once loved, a man I still loved in some quiet, grieving way, and I wondered if he could see it in my eyes. If he looked close enough, would he notice? Would he see the guilt behind the smile? Would he smell Chris's cologne still faintly clinging to the sheets? Would he sense that something inside his wife had cracked wide open and was now spilling into every corner of their life? But he didn't. Or wouldn't. And so I played my part. Smiled when expected. Laughed when prompted. Kissed the kids goodnight. Slid into bed next to the man I had once chosen. And pulled the covers over the lie I was now sleeping beside. But pretending has a shelf life. And mine was running out. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking. Not just about what I'd done, but why I did it. I kept replaying it in my head, not the night itself, but the moment before it happened. The quiet just before he walked through the door, the second I sent that text. Because that's when the real betrayal happened, wasn't it? The act was just the consequence. But the choice? The decision? That was the beginning of the end. And I started asking myself questions that didn't have clean answers. What if I didn't do it because I was lonely? But because I was angry? What if it wasn't about wanting someone else, but about wanting him to notice that I was disappearing? Wanting to scream, "Look at me. Look at what you're neglecting. Look at what you've left behind." But I never screamed. I smiled. I served dinner. I folded laundry. And when that didn't work, I stopped trying to be heard and started reaching for the nearest warmth. Was that worse? Was that cowardice? I used to think betrayal was a simple thing. A line you cross. A vow you break. A kiss that turns into something else. But now, I'm not so sure. Because what do you call it when your heart drifts years before your body ever does? Is it still betrayal if no one noticed you were slipping away? Or is that the slow kind of heartbreak that doesn't leave bruises, but still bleeds? There were nights I'd lie in bed next to Mark, his back turned, his breathing steady, and I'd remember how we used to be. Before the kids. Before the late meetings and early flights. Before the silence stretched so far between us, it felt like a canyon. I remembered the first time he told me he loved me, how his hands shook, how his voice cracked. I remembered our first apartment, how we couldn't afford curtains, so we pinned up old bedsheets and laughed about it under fairy lights. I remembered the way he used to look at me when I talked about my dreams, like I was magic. When did that stop? Was it me? Was it him? Or was it just time? I wish I could say Chris came into the picture and ruined everything, that he was the storm that broke the home. But the truth? Chris didn't break my marriage. I think I already had. Not out loud, not with malice, but in the quiet, in the neglect, in the pretending. It didn't happen all at once. It happened in the hundreds of tiny moments I stopped reaching for Mark. And he stopped noticing I wasn't. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I told him. If I sat him down, looked him in the eye, and said I wasn't faithful. And I'm not sure I even regret it the way I should. Would he be angry? Devastated? Relieved? Would he fight for me? Or would he just nod and say he saw it coming? But I never told him. Because some confessions aren't about honesty. They're about relief. And I didn't want relief. I wanted punishment. Because here's the part that haunts me most. I didn't feel guilt. Not the kind you're supposed to. I felt guilt for not feeling guilty. And that's the part that scared me the most. What does it say about me? About the version of myself I've become? Do I deserve forgiveness if I don't even feel the weight of what I did? Or is that the real tragedy, not the night itself, but the numbness that followed? Because love isn't supposed to fade. Marriage isn't supposed to become a performance. But it did. And I played my part. Until one night. I didn't. And now I live in that in-between place. Where I still kiss my husband goodnight. Still pack lunches. Still smile in family photos. But inside, I live with the knowing. And it's not loud. It's not screaming. It's quiet. Like a heartbeat you can only hear when everything else goes still. But it's there. Always there. If you've ever felt torn between who you are and who you've become, you're not alone. Maybe you woke up one day and didn't recognize the version of yourself looking back at you in the mirror. Maybe you've been carrying a secret, a wound, a hunger for years and no one ever noticed. Maybe you're the one who left. Maybe you're the one who stayed, even after everything inside you wanted to run. And maybe, like me, you crossed a line. Not because you planned to. Not because you stopped loving the person you built your life with. But because you stopped loving yourself in the life you were living. So now I want to ask you something. Really ask you. Have you ever crossed an emotional line you swore you never would? Not physically, maybe. Not